Well, it's 11:01 and we'll get started. Good morning. My name is Jan Schmitz from the Edmonton Pride Seniors Group. It's April 13th, and thank you all for attending our weekly Aging with Pride discussion group for the 2S LGBTQIA seniors and their allies. Thank you too to our partner SAGE and the Pride Center of Edmonton. Before I introduce our speaker, I must acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our lives. I must let you know that this session is being recorded for future use on our YouTube channel. If you don't wish your image to be recorded, please close your video feed. Nonprofit and community organizations simply can't function without volunteer labor. As we age and leave the paid workforce, we often see a spike in the number of requests to volunteer. More often than not, we say yes, but volunteers can and should be more than just giving back. In the lead up to National Volunteer Week, Jackie Foord will lead a discussion on how to get the most out of your volunteer experience while making meaningful contributions to the organizations and causes you care about. Jackie is a lifelong volunteer and has spent most of her career employed in the nonprofit sector. She is currently the executive director of Compassion House Foundation. Over to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Jan. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Thanks for taking your time today on what actually feels like a spring day. So happy to be here today. The light in my office is lovely, but it's not great for videos. So there's a little weird glow around me. I promise it's not a halo. And if you see my eyes looking up a little, I've got a screen up above me with my notes on it. So I'm not very good at technology when it comes to cameras and setting stuff up. So if my eyes are looking up, that doesn't mean I'm not actually engaged with you. So just so you know. So let's get started. As Jan mentioned, next week is National Volunteer Week, and it's a chance for nonprofits to thank and recognize the contributions that volunteers bring to their organizations. It's also a really good time for volunteers to pause and reflect on their current work, and for some people, it's a chance to perhaps consider volunteering for the very first time. The sector is sometimes referred to as the voluntary sector and the charitable sector, or more recently, I've heard folks talk about the social profit sector. Not sure we're ready for that new term, but it's an interesting take. But for today, I'm going to just use the word nonprofit sector, but just think that includes everything from charities to registered nonprofits across Alberta. It doesn't necessarily have one big theme to it, but I'll just call it the nonprofit sector. But whatever we call it, it's a very important social and economic driver in Alberta, and it touches almost every aspect of our lives in the community. In Alberta, there are over 26,000 charities and nonprofit associations, and that includes groups such as community associations, sports groups, recreation groups, educational organizations, faith-based organizations, arts, culture, health, social services, and senior services. Approximately 286,000 Albertans are employed in the nonprofit sector. That's a lot of people. It's over 250,000 people work in this sector. And there are 1.9 million Alberta volunteers every year. And annually, the sector contributes $5.5 billion to the Alberta economy. It's a lot of money. And the nonprofit sector is as diverse as the province itself. There are organizations with hundreds of staffs and millions of dollars in their annual operating budget. And there are some that have no staff and operate on a few $100s a year. Regardless of the scope or their size, all of them are driven by missions that are important to them and fill needs in our community. I chose today to talk about volunteering, not just because it's almost National Volunteer Week, but because volunteering is an integral part of who I am as a person and a leader. I grew up in a really small village in southeastern Saskatchewan. It was like 200 people there, I think. And as a kid, we just did work around town. I set up tables and called bingo in the church basement. I mowed the lawn at the cemetery. I set up I cleaned ice at the skating rink, and I never thought about it at the time, but I was actually volunteering. Well, some days I was voluntold. There was one job I really didn't like. It was sweeping the floors at the seniors drop-in center after school on Wednesdays. I didn't want to go, but my mom made me. So that was my first voluntold experience. And little did I know that those experiences would have such a big impact on my life. I never started university with the idea that I was going to spend the bulk of my career in the nonprofit sector. In fact, I don't ever recall making a conscious decision about that, but that's where I landed. I started my career as a fundraising consultant for capital campaigns and worked for universities, churches, private schools, really whoever would pay my fee. I then took a job. My first job in a charity was with the MS Society in Saskatchewan, and I was a fundraiser. It didn't take long for me to realize that nonprofit business and governance models, coupled with a mission to improve the lives of people, it was my jam. I felt at home. I went on to become the CEO of several small and large charities across Saskatchewan and Alberta, and I grew to appreciate the impact of volunteerism. And I just don't work in this sector. I have remained a lifelong volunteer. I estimate that on average, I spend about 200 hours a year volunteering. Sometimes it's a one-off job like a casino or a special event. And sometimes I volunteer on a shorter term project like fundraising. And sometimes charities will ask me to come in and offer advice and guidance when they have a problem. But over the years, I find that I now spend most of my time volunteering, serving as a board member. Today, I'm on the boards of 4 organizations: the Ribbon Rouge Foundation, the Good Hearts Transplant Foundation, the Edmonton Community Legal Center, and Radius Health. And you may know Radius Health, they just recently changed their name. That is the Boyle Macaulay Health Center. I also serve as an advisor to the Intervivos Mentoring Organization and the Firefly Institute. So what motivates me and the 1.9 million other Albertans to spend time volunteering? Humans are pretty complex, so we volunteer for all kinds of reasons. But overall, I think I can put the reasons into 2 broad categories. One is sociological and the other is psychological. Sociological motivation is close to what Aristotle meant when he said, "What is the essence of life? It is to serve others and to do good." So this category are the folks who give their time and talents because they truly believe that other people or the community at large needs something. They want to contribute to the public good. In this case, you can think of folks who get together every spring to clean up the river valley, or those folks who walk our downtown streets most evenings handing out food, safe supplies, and naloxone kits. Those people want to contribute to the public good. Psychological motivation relates to when someone volunteers because it fills their own psychological or social needs. These folks see volunteering as a way to develop or enhance themselves as a person. In this case, think about folks who volunteer because they feel isolated and they want to meet new people, or they're looking for a promotion at work, or they need a special skill to put on their resume to help them advance their career. There's really, and I mean this sincerely, there is no right or wrong motivation for volunteering. Too often I hear people say in the sector and other places, "Oh, they're just volunteering to pad their resume." So what? It's okay to do it, to volunteer, to pad your resume. It's okay to volunteer for personal needs. Volunteering is at its essence a give and take for both the volunteer and the organization. Don't ever pretend that both sides of that transaction are benefiting. But in my experience, I've often seen folks who start volunteering because they have personal motivation, but they stay with volunteering even after they reach all those goals because they come to see the greater need in the community and want to help. In other words, volunteering can be kind of addictive. Regardless of your motivation for volunteering, every volunteer gets the same benefits. And research has shown that volunteering offers so many health benefits, especially for older adults. Volunteering improves physical and mental health. Research has found that volunteering among adults over the age of 60 provides benefits to physical and mental health. It literally keeps us moving. And volunteers report better physical health than non-volunteers. Research has also shown that volunteering leads to lower rates of depression and anxiety, especially for people aged 65 and over. Volunteering reduces stress and increases positive feelings by releasing dopamine, kind of like exercising, but probably not as intense. When I'm on my bike or running or walking, I know I have dopamine. It's not quite the same as when I'm sitting down reading a board report. But it's still there in either case. By spending time in service to others, volunteers report feeling a sense of meaning and appreciation, both given and received, which can have a stress-reducing effect. And we all know that reduced stress further decreases our risk of many physical and mental health problems, including heart disease, stroke, depression, and anxiety. In addition, a longitudinal study, a study of aging in Australia, found that people who volunteer have lower mortality rates than those who do not, even when they controlled for age, gender, and physical health. Volunteering also provides a sense of purpose. In Canada, ageism is a real problem. Too often, seniors are directly or indirectly told that their skills and they are less than valued. Volunteering can combat those feelings of being past our prime. The work that volunteers provide is essential to community and the economy, which gives volunteers a sense of purpose, especially when volunteering in the areas they find meaningful. Older volunteers report experiencing higher increases in life satisfaction and self-esteem than those who do not volunteer. Volunteering also nurtures new and existing relationships. Volunteering increases social interaction and helps build the support system based on common interests. Dedicating time as a volunteer helps us expand our social networks and practice social skills with others. And we all know that seniors are at a greater risk of isolation, and that pandemic has not helped any of us. So we could all use a little bit more social interaction. But to be honest, every once in a while, I should practice my social skills too. So getting out really does help. And this one I love. Volunteering makes you happy. And I'm not just saying that because I'm happy and I volunteer. The London School of Economics examined the relationship between volunteering and measures of happiness in a large group of American adults. This was several years ago. They found that the more people volunteered, the happier they were. So compared to people who never volunteer, the odds of being very happy rose 7% among those who volunteer every month. The odds of being very happy rose to 12% for those who volunteer every 2 to 4 weeks. And among weekly volunteers, 16% felt very happy. Like, how cool is that? It's pretty hard some days to feel happy about the state of the world, especially if you're, watching the news or some days just walking down the street. So the fact that volunteerism can really increase and is measurable increase in your happiness is pretty cool. So having worked in the sector and being a volunteer, I've come to approach volunteering with perhaps a more unique perspective than some others. My time is as valuable as anyone on this call and anyone on this planet. So first and foremost, I want to feel that I'm contributing and making an impact on an issue that I care about. And secondly, and this one came later in life, I really want to have fun when I volunteer. Life's way too short not to have fun. So what do I look for when I examine a new volunteer opportunity that is more than a one-off or a one-day commitment? Well, my days of needing to volunteer to get ahead in my career are behind me. So my motivation is public good. If I don't personally see the value or I'm not passionate about the issue, I will turn down the invitation to volunteer. I'll just politely say no. Sometimes I'll connect folks with people who might have that passion or that value, have that same sense of value for the issue. But it's never a good idea to volunteer for something that you aren't personally invested in. So if I get past that test and I care about the issue, my next question is, what can I contribute to that organization? Are my skills something that they need? And I do still measure my contribution in the skills that I bring to the table. You can volunteer to get new skills, or you can volunteer the skills that you already have. And there's, again, nothing wrong with either one of those. For me personally, I don't know what it is. Maybe, I hope it's not age, but I'm not sure that there's a new skill I need to learn at this point when it comes to my volunteer work. So I tend to volunteer for places that need the skills that I already have. So if they do need my skills, then I get into the nitty-gritty of the organization. This is where the more in-depth look happens. I look at the organization that's asking me in greater detail. First of all, what is their stated mission? Again, does it relate to me? And does it relate to the issue that not relate, that's the wrong word. If the mission is to end X, but the mission is going about it in a way that I'm not sure is the best way, or the way that doesn't interest me, I'll say it's just not going to work for me. So a mission is important, but are they approaching the problem they're trying to solve in a way that resonates with me? Then I look at their value statements. What are their stated values? And some of them, have everything from love, peace, generosity, whatever they are. But then the question is, do they live up to them? And you can find that out by talking to their volunteers, to their board members, to their staff. But you can also find out a lot about them in their financial statements, which are typically online or in their annual reports. So are they living their values in real ways, or is the values just a list of nice things that they came up with on a weekend getaway, as boards often do? Another question that some of us around this table might want to ask, but a lot of people don't, is it safe for me to be open about my sexuality within this particular organization? Lots of, and it's a tough question to ask when you're first coming out, but it got easier over time for probably all of us. But are they open to having an LGBTQ2S+ person being themselves within their organization? Or would they prefer that we never talked about that? It's thrown a lot of organizations off kilter when I've asked that question, because, well, of course we are. But then when you dig in a little further, you see that maybe they don't know how to include folks like us. And if they can't include folks like us, how are they including Indigenous people, racialized people, people with different socioeconomic backgrounds? So I look for an inclusive organization. And I ask to see if they have one, and more groups do, but I ask to see it, if they have one, their diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. If they don't have one of those, again, it's more research. It's talk to the board members, talk to the volunteer manager if they have one, or to the executive director. But it's really important for me. Took me way too long to get out of the closet. I'm not going back in for a volunteer gig. Then I ask questions that are they well governed? Do they have a good, solid board of directors? The health of the indication of health for a nonprofit isn't necessarily that they're well governed all the time. Just like people, nonprofits go through cycles of good times and bad times. And if they're going through a rough time, whether it's maybe they don't have enough fundraising, or I had a friend the other day that wanted to volunteer for an organization. He called them, and the first thing they said is, would you like to be on our board? Because all the board just quit. Wasn't probably a good way to open that conversation, but nonprofits, big and small, go through really tough times. It's okay to volunteer for an organization when they're having a tough time, but make sure you know that. I also asked if they have a volunteer management program. To be honest, most don't. It's expensive to run a volunteer management program. and for some smaller organizations, it's just not worth, they don't have enough volunteers to make that investment. But the big places that get thousands of volunteers a year, something like the food bank or the YMCA or something like that, would have a volunteer management program. Ask them to read their policies and give you an idea of how they will treat not only you, but the others who are volunteering as well. So don't get set off or don't get put off if they don't have a volunteer management program per se, as those of us in the industry would call it. But try to find out how they treat their volunteers. Do they spend time saying thank you? Do they recognize that some volunteers have skills that they want to use in some places, but they don't want to? So don't shoehorn. If I say I want to be on the board, don't try to have me, I don't know, run a fitness class, because that's not going to work. So how they treat you as a volunteer is the same way they're going to treat their other volunteers as well. And then the big question is, how much of my time do they need? Always ask that question. Is it kind of job that you get a shift every couple of weeks? If it's a more governance role, how many meetings are you expected to attend? Is it just one-off every couple of months? Ask them what time they need. So when I have all that information about the charity, then it's time to self-reflect and look at myself to make my decision. In my personal case, I would have to decide, what do I have to give up to take on this new role? There's only so many hours in a day, and between my work, my other volunteer commitments, and what I'm now thinking is small social life, my days are pretty busy. So I have to make decisions. What do I have to give up in order to take on this new role? I also consider whether the opportunity will expand my social connections. I love meeting new people. It's one of my favorite things. So this is an important one for me. So if I'm going to go into a different organization to help out, who am I going to meet? Are they people I already know? That's okay. But are there new people, which is important for me? I just like getting different perspectives. So how do I make that decision about my time? Maybe I want to take this new gig, and my term on another board or committee or another commitment is coming to an end. Then I find time. Or maybe this opportunity is so important to me that I want to let one of the other commitments go. And then at that point, I would have to say to the other group, I'm going to be phasing out my work with them, and how would that look? Or maybe despite all of the green flags, it's well governed, it's got a great diversity inclusion policy, it takes a little bit of time, but maybe I still have to say no, because my commitments to the other organizations mean something. And I don't take that lightly. I've worked in the sector long enough to see volunteers who've overcommitted themselves. And to be honest, I'd much rather know that you can't do something than have you jam all the work that you said you were going to do into the last 20 minutes before you showed up to the assignment. I get why people overcommit, because you just want to help. But the fact is, it's more harmful than not to commit to something and then not being able to fulfill your commitments. It's easier my personal perspective from sitting as a leader in a nonprofit is, I'd rather have you quit than overcommit and just not deliver. So my decision tree about when to take on a new volunteer gig seems really structured, and it really is really structured. The only thing I know for sure about my life, that time is finite, and I want to use that very precious commodity in a way that is purposeful and brings me happiness and fulfillment. So I'm pretty fussy about who I volunteer for. So if you're not already volunteering, I would encourage you to do so. And I'm going to guess, based the fact that you're all here and I recognize some of the names on this group, that you do all volunteer. But maybe it's time to encourage others to volunteer, or because there are literally millions of ways that your skills and talents can help an organization. The gamut runs from physical labor. Every once in a while, I think back, and I should probably do it more, sorting food in the food bank, or mowing the lawn, or shoveling the sidewalk at my neighbor's house. It can be physical labor. It can be sharing, like I do, my professional skills around governance and problem solving, or just hanging out. I worked at a long-term care center for a while, and some of the happiest people I ever met were those who just came in to work as a companion or to help set up recreational programs at senior centers. So I can't imagine there's a task in the world that some volunteer organization could put to good use. But wherever you volunteer, don't forget that you have the right to be treated with respect and dignity by the organization that you choose to spend your time with. If you don't feel that if you don't feel that respect or that dignity, or you don't feel like they appreciate the work that you do, there are lots of other places for you to go. As one of my friends says, the volunteer job market is always hiring. A quick story, last year I actually retired. And yes, I just unretired a couple months ago. But I was retired for most of 2022 and had no intention of going back to work. Shortly after I retired, I started to get calls and emails from groups asking me to volunteer. And for many of those groups, their opening line was, "Hey, Jackie, you're retired, so you have time to help us." It was not their best sales pitch. To be quite frank, it's insulting and ageist. In some cases, the organizations wanted me to do work that was essentially consulting work. When I mentioned my consulting fees, the conversation usually ended rather quickly. Being a senior doesn't mean that you have lots of time to do things. And it certainly doesn't mean that your work has no value. And I see so many, and Eric was talking about some of the work in the Alberta friendly, I'm getting this wrong, but the seniors groups in town. I hope that the message is getting across to more and more people that ageism and devaluation of people because of their age, it has no place in any organizations, and none of us have to put up with it. Nobody. So stand your ground when it comes to that. And don't forget that it's not selfish to want something in return for your work. Be upfront with the organizations about that. Tell them what new skill you want to learn. Tell them what skill you have that you'd like to just keep in practice. Let them know that you want to meet new people, but please remember that volunteering is not a dating site. I've had so many volunteers say, "Well, I'd like to meet someone who's," and then they start describing the person they want to meet. I'm thinking, that's not why you're volunteering. That's a little too specific. So no dating. It might happen. Romance can happen wherever it happens, but don't approach this kind of work because you're looking to find a new life partner. The more honest you are with your organization about what you expect to get from your time, the more likely you are to have a really good experience. And the more likely that organization is to make sure that they're using you, and that's a terrible word to use, but they're using your time and talents in a way that's helpful for them. Because again, it's a two-way street. So I'm going to wrap up and take some questions if you have any. So my social, my professional, my emotional life is so much richer because of the time that I give. And I can't even imagine. I was thinking about this the other day when I was prepping the notes for this. I can't even imagine who I would be if I didn't have volunteerism in my life. It's incomprehensible to me. So I hope that today's session helped you to think about volunteering in a different way, to think about the questions you can ask when you're thinking about volunteering, or even to reflect on some of the work that you do now as a volunteer and maybe see it in a different light. And I hope that above all else, you walk away with the sense that even though most of North American society tells us that because we're of a certain age, we have less value and we have more time, that is not the case. Who you are and what skills you bring to the table are important and needed regardless of your age. So, and with that, I'll take questions if anybody has any.
Go ahead, Grant.
Okay. Thanks for that, Jackie. There's a lot of good stuff in there, I think. But I have a question. You were talking about whether or not the organization you're thinking of volunteering for would be inclusive of people in our group, racialized people. I'd just like to point out that white is a race as well. But how do they show this? You know, I've done a lot of volunteering in my time, and it's never been an issue. It's also not ever been anything I've really thought about.
It's a very good question, because sometimes it's microscopic. Sometimes groups will not. There's assumptions made about you. There's assumptions made that you're you are exactly as you look at. In my case, a woman that looks cis. So there'll be questions about, well, how's your husband doing? How are the kids? I've seen a group not long ago that I did a workshop for that just ignored pronouns, despite the fact that people asked them to be recognized. We've all been in a room where how shall I say this? The Thanksgiving dinner trope about, there's the homophobic uncle that's at the table. If you see those people in an organization and they're not talked to or they're not corrected at the time, that means the organization isn't as inclusive, isn't as welcoming, and isn't understanding of the people who are working for them. So I'm not sure if I'm not sure those are really good examples, but I'm not sure I can just say you'll know. But there are times when you know.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, I've never had a problem that way, or at least not that. No, I've never had a problem because I would have been aware of it if there was a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just think, when I'm volunteering, I'm doing it for the organization, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
And if that goal is being met, who cares if people make assumptions about me? That's their problem, not mine.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to, ask me how my wife is, I'll just say, no, I don't have one. And they can take from that anything they want. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, I think we get a little too, not sure, sensitive maybe to things like that. People make assumptions about everything. It's why the species has survived, because we have to make assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
We have to judge situations. If somebody is being offensive deliberately, call them out or talk to the organization and get them to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's inadvertent, you might want to say something mild. I just don't know. I found it interesting because it's never been an issue.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad it hasn't been.
Mm-hmm.
It's for me, when I'm volunteering, it's not just me, because if it's a slight against me, I can deal with it. But if I see it against others, whether it has to do with their age, their race, their sexuality, their religion, if their organizations need to be sensitive to that, to use your word, and they have to correct that behavior when they see it. If they let it go on, that's not a place I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
I see Eric has his hand up. Do you want to go ahead, Eric?
Thank you so much for that presentation, Jackie. A couple of things. One, just to briefly touch on Grant's issue. What I think that pretty much any organization right now should have, no matter the size of the organization, even if it's written out on a scrap of paper, should have an equity, diversity, and inclusion policy that they need to look at. One of the things that behind that for me is that if I go somewhere and I feel that I'm not being treated with respect, and recognizing I'm a white cis male who's lived with privilege all his life, So if I'm being if I feel I'm being disrespected, then I have to wonder about the services that they're providing to the community members. So that's it. Then the last thing is, we all change over time in life, but I've got some basic rules for being involved in an organization right now. And that is it a cause that I believe in? Are there nice people involved in it? Is there a total lack of political gamesmanship? And, do I have time on my calendar? In the past, I have been loaned out to some organizations that were in deep trouble. And with other people, we managed to work it through and overcome some challenges, and they were successful. But I'm too old. That puts an awful lot of stress on me. So right now, I prefer to deal with organizations that sort of got their act together. But those are my brief comments on that, Jackie. Thank you very much.
That's a great one, but I want to find out which organization you've ever found that has a total lack of political gamesmanship, because I've yet to meet them.
Aging with Pride.
There you go.
And the Edmonton Pride Seniors Group.
Love it. But I do love a little politics in my wine too.
A brief plug right there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's that mute button. Please go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, Jackie, for that. Jackie, I just wanted to add one other area that I've noticed in the last number of years for myself, and I think for many people who are older, is you're also asked to provide some of your experience about past history, what's happened, et cetera, and that too. And I think that's a different kind of volunteering. And I don't mean that in any negative sense. I just think it's a different kind of thing that you bring. We oftentimes don't ask 20-year-olds to tell us about their life and what was good and changed, that as we do with older folks, and that oftentimes people want to know, so what was it like, or did you face this, or what is it, has that changed, kind of thing in that. I think I find that particularly with schools, if I'm asked to do something in schools, I find that as well. It's just another kind of category that I hadn't thought about 20 years ago, wouldn't have ever crossed my mind, kind of thing in that same way. So I'm just to add to it, but thanks for the presentation. Really very well done. Much appreciated. And I may have talked to you about doing a few things in the past. They're still there presently.
Yes, that is true. The idea of how seeing older volunteers, aging volunteers, talking about what used to be or what things are like is a really good. You're right. That is it. That is a part of volunteering. That is a part of community building and legacy. Not legacy for you, but like how, in some cases, organizational legacy is lost over time. So inviting folks back to say, hey, what was it like at whatever that group was back then? We can all learn from before, but it's really, I don't know, the older I get, the more important history becomes to me. So I think I always appreciate those groups that reach out for that history, because that means they don't want to lose it.
I see Larry has his hand up, and then we'll hear from Joan after.
Okay, I really had two things that I'm thinking about: very small organizations, in which, firstly, where it's sort of confusing, there's confusion between governance and actually the operations of the thing. And related to that is the organization in which there is a powerful person, so often a founder, and how you negotiate through that. And so I suppose my question is, at what point do you feel you have sufficient clarity that you need to decide to fair cut bait? You either have something to offer, or it's not a fix, a good fit for you. Thanks, Jackie, and thank you so much for the talk. I did appreciate it.
Thanks. You've just hit on two of the toughest quandaries in the nonprofit sector. And I'm going to speak now, not as a volunteer, but as someone who's worked in the sector for a long time. all organizations go through what I would call it's like a life phase. So at the very beginning of organizations, it's typically one to five people say, here's an issue that's really important, we should do something about it. So they get together, they start doing things. And as the organization, to be honest, most nonprofits fail in the first 5 years. Vast majority of them never make it past their 5th birthday. But those that do, as their mission grows and as their, what's the word I'm looking for there, they take on more and more responsibilities as volunteers, there gets that point where the blurriness between, there has to be a board of directors. The government of Alberta says there has to be a board of directors. But that board, I sit on one of those right now, the Good Hearts Transplant Foundation. We don't have any staff. So I'm the president, I'm the tax issuer, I'm the communications person, I sign the leases for our suites. I do all that, but I sit as a board member. For those organizations, there comes a time if things go to a certain place where there's too much work for those volunteers. And that's when they hire their first staff person. And that first staff person has the toughest road in nonprofit because they have a board that typically is tired and wants to give up doing the day-to-day, and they hand it over to that new staff person and say, knock yourselves out, we're gonna be a board now. And there's just that, it takes a long time and it's really messy to sever or to make the leap between a governance board and an operational board. And even those who get to the point of governance sometimes slip back into operations. So it's messy. And as a volunteer on the board, it's messy. As the staff person, it's messy. Things cut or what is that term about cutting bait or staying in, whatever that is. It comes that way for all of them, right? And again, there's another point between probably the 8th and 10th years where a lot of organizations fail because they just can't get past that. If they do get past it and everything keeps going, they'll probably be fine. But it's a personal decision on when to just say, I can't do this anymore. I'm happy to volunteer as doing the physical labor or the work that needs to be done for the mission, but I'm not happy to sit on the board, or vice versa. It's okay to say no. It's okay to get out of that because it is messy. But all I can say is through the evolution of organizations, nonprofits, it likely gets better. But there's nothing wrong with you saying you don't want to be there. But the founder syndrome, now that is a problem that I've helped a few organizations try to navigate. And for those who don't know, a lot of nonprofits are founded by one person with a singular mission, and they grip that organization. I remember talking to a group one time that the founder had been on the board for 25 years and still wanted that organization to look just like it did the day she founded it. The founders can over time become roadblocks to progress. They can impede the organization's ability to grow, and they can impede, more importantly, they can impede the organization's ability to deal with its clients in a way that reflects today, not 25 years ago. So there's no good way to have a coup. And a lot of nonprofit boards let those founders stay because it's easier, and that's okay too. Pick the path of least resistance as long as the work is going on more or less as it should. But I did see one not that long ago that had a discussion that didn't go well about 3 years ago, but then the discussion came to money. And they went to the founder and said, look, we have this organization or this donor that wants to give us money, but it means changes to the organization. And one of those changes means you're not chairing the board anymore, that you're the chair emeritus, and that the board changes the way it is, or changes its structure and becomes more like all the other nonprofits so that we can get bigger grants and bigger donations. And it worked. I was surprised it worked because I actually thought that person would just whip out their checkbook, but didn't. you can only play that card if you actually have data that says that because of the way the board is structured, you're missing out on money. And then I do know a group in Saskatoon where they literally waited for that person to die and then they changed everything. So it's a tough one because you can cause a lot of public relations damage by handling that situation badly, because that person's more likely to go and say, look, I poured my heart and soul into this organization and then they fired me. But if there's a magic silver bullet for that one, I would love to have it, because I see organizations facing it a lot, more than I think most people would realize. It's a good question, Larry. Thanks.
Yeah, hi Jackie. Well, finally I get to see your face. I've heard your name mentioned so many times, always in a good light.
Thank you.
My question is, you mentioned money. I was kind of thinking along those terms. So in your role as a volunteer person, have you or do you often claim expenses, and is there a easy venue? For example, mileage, is that something you would claim, and do you go through the organization or do you just do it on your own through income tax or whatever?
Mm-hmm. For the most part, volunteer expenses are limited to things. Sometimes it's mileage, sometimes it's food or like meals when you're out volunteering on certain things. More and more organizations are providing either a stipend or else providing childcare on site so that people can come and bring their kids to these events, to their volunteer gigs. Most, except the really small ones, most of those organizations have a policy that explains how expenses can be claimed. But my experience is, for the most part, even as a board member, there's very, very few expenses that you would actually submit a claim for. And I'm trying to think what they are. You know, sometimes if a board member is expected to go to a board meeting in Winnipeg, then yeah, they're going to pay the expenses. But your transportation to and from a board meeting, or to and from a committee, or even to and from a special event is not likely to be covered by most organizations.
Okay, thank you.
But ask them. Yeah, because sometimes, you know, there's lots of, how shall I say, well-endowed organizations where that's just part of it. And there's, in some cases, even though they're nonprofits, they do have per meeting honorariums for their board members. It's rare, but it does happen.
Right. Is that also, can you do it? Is there another tool, like just through Canada Revenue Agency? Can you just do it that way, or is that not so much?
You can't receive a tax receipt from an organization for the service that you provide. However, if there is, you know, there's the old thing that in the industry they call it the check exchange. So let's say that the organization that you submit a mileage claim, they pay it and then you give it back, you can get a tax receipt for that. So there's no, it's a zero sum for the organization, but you get the tax receipt.
Okay.
Benefit. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Eric.
Just one quick question, and this is, well, question or thought of advice. I'm 75. I think since the time I was 25, there hasn't been a time where I haven't been on at least 2 boards, and just keeps going and going and going. And I think one of the important things is allow yourself to age and allow yourself to change. Right now, there are some organizations that I think are really important. I do want to be on the board of those. But other ones, I'm thinking more of, I want to do more direct service. I want to drive for Drive Happiness, or do income tax at Sage, or do other direct service, because you get away from the policies, procedures stuff. And that's what I'm finding now. And I think sometimes I talk to somebody and said, well, you're good at being a board member. Why don't you stay a board member? And that was a nice compliment, but I think it's really important to recognize where you are, what gives you happiness and what gives you satisfaction, and go with that, because it's your time that you're donating.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. Sometimes it's nice to just go and do something that has nothing to do with your regular skill set and just go have fun.
Jackie, I have a question comment, and it's to do with rewarding volunteers or awards or appreciation. Are there good do's and don'ts to that from an organization's perspective?
I think first and foremost, it has to be genuine. Like it has your appreciation for a volunteer. If it doesn't come from the heart and soul of the organization, if it's just a token, we're going to have a barbecue once a year, and then that alone can be nice, but it really, the genuine appreciation of people, I think, happens one-on-one. So Jan, you come volunteer for me this afternoon, and before you leave, I again tell you thank and tell you what impact that the work that you did had on us that day. To me, that for me personally, I think that's the best volunteer recognition and appreciation. However, if you've got thousands of volunteers or you don't, or that's impossible. So getting together, saying thank you as a group, saying thank you with sometimes it's something as simple as a letter from the board chair saying, hey, you did great work this year. As long as there was a time, and I haven't seen it for a while. I think it's changed only because of the pandemic. It used to be a time when people say, oh, you spend too much money on volunteer appreciation. And so you'll see a line in the financial statement that says volunteer appreciation was X number of dollars. And people are like, yeah, that's a lot of money. My comeback to that is, if I had to pay all those people, can you imagine what the bottom line of this organization would look like? So I think in a perfect world, you would know your volunteers well enough to know that for Jan, it's really important that I say thank you in person. But maybe for Bill, it's really important that we have that summer barbecue. And for Grant, it's a Christmas party or something like that. It's hard to know, it's hard to be that individual, but I think that's the best way to do it. But sometimes you just go with the most you can do for the most people you can do at one point in time. So it really does make a huge difference. And sometimes it's something really spectacular. Like if you had volunteered for us for 20 years, I'd probably give you your own reception, a small one with your friends and family and the organization. So, but the most important part is be genuine when you thank someone. It can't be just a token. Here's a note, or here's a pin. Thanks for coming out. I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Guy, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to offer another learning as a volunteer now, and it's a sense of deeper appreciation and realism about what's involved in big organizations. So like the one that I'm the most involved with is obviously the art gallery. And I never understood what the poor fellow, what the scope of his work was to organize community events. And I've spent a good 20 hours helping him do one event. And he has 4 or 5 a month that he has to pull off. And so it gives me both a sense of satisfaction. It's nice that I'm using some skills that I feel comfortable using, but it also keeps me more honest and respectful of him and the kind of task that's put before him, because I'm realizing he's got a really hard job and he doesn't have a whole lot of support, and anybody who helps him a little bit is deeply appreciated. So it's just another benefit that I wouldn't have expected by being a volunteer there. So I thought I would just add that to the discussion.
That is really a great addition. People who work in the nonprofit sector typically get paid anywhere between 15 to 35% less than people in the private sector for doing the exact same work. And there's never enough of them. And without that volunteer, like Yugi helping them out, those events would not happen. Sometimes we come into an organization and the staff person just seems frazzled or disorganized or not ready for us to be there. The fact that they had 400 other things to do that day that didn't have anything to do with the thing that you're there to help them with, sometimes keep that in the back of your mind, because I don't know anybody in the nonprofit sector who's actually just able to work specifically on the one narrow task that's written on their job description.
Thank you, Guy. I think we have time for one last question. Michael, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thanks. I can't believe I didn't say this earlier. But you know, most politicians depend upon volunteers for their work and to get elected. And I would say that the benefit, or not the, maybe isn't the right word, but because it's short-term volunteering, you know, mostly it's a period of, you know, a couple months. And what I oftentimes find is that many people who, even those that are fairly busy, will say, well, you know, in 3 months it's done and over, and I'm gone. I don't, you know, it ends. And I do think there is something about that notion of its ending that helps bring some volunteers into becoming part of campaigns. And now it just indicate that in terms of a democracy here in Canada and elsewhere, without volunteers, we'd fall apart, kind of thing. And politically, I would fear what that might look like. So just to emphasize that, and it's a different kind of volunteering in one sense, but in another sense, it's like many other volunteering experiences, with the exception that it's over. There's an election day and it's done, and you're done. And maybe the candidate is done as well. Anyway, thanks.
That's a good point. I've spent a lot of my life volunteering in politics. It's a lot of fun and very different than when I'm, you know, sitting on a board somewhere.
Well, we're going to give the final word to you, Jackie. That's quite an inspiring talk. Thank you for that. Do you have any last words or events to advertise, or anything you'd like to say to us?
No, just that I really enjoyed this discussion today. Brought lots of different perspectives to the work I do, because I'm enmeshed in it all the time. So it's nice to hear from others. And just, I'm going to guess that every one of you volunteers in some way, shape, or form in your lives. And next week is National Volunteer Week. So say to yourself, damn, I'm fantastic. But also thank you for the work that you do, because Edmonton's better because you're in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.